This is the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy Podcast, Episode 58, the 2023 Biennial Report Update. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. You know, the loss of nutrients in Illinois' lakes, streams, and rivers harms water quality here and downstream all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, or NLRS, was established in 2015 and designed to reduce the nutrient load in the Illinois waterways and the Mississippi River and its negative impacts by exploring and recommending practical research-based nutrient loss practices and collaborating with partners across the state. This podcast is part of that partnership. Now, the 2023 NLRS Biennial Report, now available at go.illinois.edu/NLRS, I'll repeat that in a moment, is the latest update to the strategy. It documents water quality updates and initiatives that reduce the loss of the nutrients, nitrogen, and phosphorus across three sectors: agricultural, wastewater treatment facilities, and urban stormwater. Again, you can find the biennial report at go.illinois.edu/NLRS. Today, we'll explore some of those sectors. We'll start with Trevor Sample. He's at the Illinois EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the state, and he's the coordinator of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy there. I asked him to, again, explain just exactly what the NLRS is and how it was put together.
So the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy was released in 2015. It was developed by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and University of Illinois, with input provided by a diverse group of stakeholders representing agriculture, wastewater treatment plants, conservation and environmental organizations, and state and federal agencies and industry.
Exactly why was it put together?
The strategy was in response to the Hypoxia Task Force Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan that was released in 2008. In 2011, U.S. EPA released a memo directing states to develop state nutrient strategies that would reach a goal of reducing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus discharged to the Gulf of Mexico by 45%. The Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy also has set interim goals of 15% reduction nitrate and 25% reduction of total phosphorus by 2025. The strategy addresses nutrient loss from three main sectors: non-point source, which is agriculture, runoff, or stream bank erosion; point sources, which consist of wastewater treatment plants; and urban stormwater.
What's the purpose of the biennial reports that are released?
The purpose of the biennial report is provide an update to the public on the progress made in implementing the strategy, and also provides a mechanism for updating the strategy itself so it remains a living document.
Can you share some key points of that biennial report for me as it relates to the point source sector? And maybe you should define that as well.
Sure. So a point source is a source of pollution that comes from a discernible point. It's actually defined in the Clean Water Act. Usually any type of wastewater is discharged to a stream or a river or lake. It comes from a source such as a pipe. So one of the highlights of the point source sector for this biennial report is that the point source sector has achieved a combined statewide reduction of 6.2 million pounds of phosphorus from 2011 to 2022. This represents a 34% reduction, which exceeds the 25% reduction goal by 2025 that was set in the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy report. The baseline load was 18.1 million pounds in 2011, and the total load for 2022 was 11.9 million. 10.2 million pounds of that is from the 211 major municipal dischargers. 1.3 million is estimated to come from the minor municipals. That's about 970 wastewater treatment plant facilities. And then about another 400,000 pounds comes from industrial facilities.
So what are the requirements point sources are being asked to meet to reduce nutrient loss, and how are those goals being accomplished?
So wastewater treatment facilities, in order to discharge wastewater, they have to have what's called a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. That's a Clean Water Act permit that our agency, the Illinois EPA, administers. And those permits dictate the amount and type of pollutants that can be discharged into that wastewater. So when it comes to phosphorus, Right now, the facilities are aiming to meet 1 milligram per liter phosphorus concentration in their discharge, and eventually that number will move to 0.5 milligrams per liter phosphorus in their discharge. In Illinois, we have 211 what we call major municipal facilities. These are facilities that have a design average flow of 1 million gallons per day or more. Out of the 211, 101 facilities discharge an average phosphorus concentration of 1 milligram per liter or less, and of those, 46 are meeting a 0.5 milligram per liter or less phosphorus discharge. So this is another metric that we use in showing progress from the individual point sources themselves. 67 individual facilities are currently completing what are called nutrient assessment reduction plans. Most of these are due December 31st, and the remaining are due next December. And these plans will help facilities. It's a way for facilities to show our agency how they're going to go about reducing phosphorus, not only from their discharge, but also within the watershed itself. The statewide point sources also have reduced total nitrogen loads by 11.6% from the baseline 2011 through 2022. Major municipal facilities were also required to complete and submit feasibility and optimization studies to Illinois EPA, and all of those studies have been submitted to date. Looking down the road, by the end of this decade, we anticipate the point source sector will achieve our long-term goal of 45% reduction to phosphorus and possibly even exceeding that.
Again, that's Trevor Sample. He's the NLRS, or Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy Coordinator at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. If you'd like to learn more about Illinois EPA and its involvement in the NLRS, you can search Google for Illinois EPA or go to their website and then look for their NLRS page. Illinois Extension is also involved in the nutrient loss reduction strategy, as you are very well likely to know. Ileana Brown covers the stormwater sector.
I'm Extension's water quality and stormwater specialist. Now, before I was in this role right now, I coordinated the strategy, and I still help lead the stormwater aspect of it.
What exactly is stormwater, and what role, by the way, does it play in the NLRS?
Stormwater runoff refers to rainfall and melted snow that doesn't soak into the ground because it's hitting those hard surfaces like roads, roofs, and parking lots. This runoff is a significant contributor of urban water pollution, carrying phosphorus and nitrogen and other things into water bodies via storm drains. The NLRS science assessment found that stormwater sector's impact on the overall nutrient load in the state leaving the state is relatively minor compared to other sectors. However, it still poses a threat to water quality in our local lakes and rivers in Illinois. Consequently, stormwater runoff is addressed as an integral component of the strategy to safeguard water quality.
Can you share some highlights, Ileana, of the 2023 Biennial report as it relates to the stormwater sector?
So the report highlighted the engagement of more than 8,900 participants in 121 stormwater management events during the 21-22, which underscores the widespread community involvement. MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, played a major role in stormwater management, investing $1.45 million in green infrastructure program projects, thereby increasing retention capacity by more than 500,000 gallons. Their overall commitment for the 2021 stormwater program amounted to $44.7 million. Illinois EPA's Green Infrastructure Grant Opportunities Program awarded $5 million to support 11 stormwater projects in 2021, which resulted in retention of 1.2 million gallons of stormwater and a reduction of annual pollutants. They also had 14 urban stormwater best management practices covering 174 acres. Those were implemented through the Illinois EPA Section 319 grant. Two last things for it to add on this. The Illinois Groundwork website, established in 21-22, provides some valuable green infrastructure resources for both professionals and the public. And there was a green infrastructure inventory map that showcased nearly 2,000 stormwater best management practices across the state.
How do you define green infrastructure? And what role does it play in reducing nutrient loss?
Oh, yeah, great question. So, you know how I was saying that stormwater runoff doesn't soak in? Green infrastructure captures that water and allows it to act more like the natural water cycle, soaking in usually or storing it for use later. So, it refers to nature based systems designed to manage water, provide environmental benefits, and promote environmental resiliency. It uses natural processes and elements like vegetation, soil, permeable surfaces that address these water quality challenges by decreasing stormwater runoff that goes to those Illinois rivers. Practices for green infrastructure include rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavement, green roofs, cisterns, and constructed stormwater wetlands.
And finally, do you have any advice for the homeowner, the business owner, or maybe concerned community members interested in learning more about green infrastructure and its adoption?
Sure. And you're absolutely right. Green infrastructure can be on a number of different scales. So, on the scale of a residential rain garden to a large municipal community wide constructed stormwater wetland or a series of bioswales. So, my advice is to educate yourself about green infrastructure. You can go to go.illinois.edu/rainfall management. That's extensions page that covers these issues. There's also that illinoisgroundwork.org, that website that I mentioned. And you can go there and learn more about these kinds of green infrastructure practices and the many benefits that they provide. You can attend some workshops and events. Rainscaping is one that we put on through Extension. It's a collaboration between the University of Illinois and Purdue Extension, and it provides training and resources for green infrastructure that can be installed in that residential setting or small scale public spaces. Lastly, I'd advise people to really lead by example, be a role model for green infrastructure adoption in your community. You can demonstrate the positive impact on your own property. You can inspire others to follow suit and contribute to a more sustainable and resilient community.
Ileana Brown is with Illinois Extension. She covered the urban stormwater segment of the biennial nutrient loss reduction strategy. We've also already talked about the wastewater treatment facilities. Those are both point sources. Now let's turn our attention to one of the non-point source areas, agriculture. We're joined by Brian Renneker. He is the Land and Water Resources Bureau Chief at the Illinois Department of Agriculture.
I'm a third generation farmer, so I'm kind of proud of that. Actually, my grandparents started and owned an implement dealership. So I literally grew up in the ag equipment industry. Like I used to say, my babysitter was the backseat of a tractor window when I was younger. So I do have a long history in the ag sector with that, the family history and the farming. Big conservation guy. I've always had a connection to just conservation, regardless if it's in the ag sector or just our what we classify like DNR conservation. Part of my job here at ag is pollinators and being the chief apiary inspector. So that really plays really good to the stuff that I'm really highly invested in.
So, the ag sector plays a really large role in nutrients leaving the state. There's a lot of support, of course, from NLRS partner organizations to support farmers, landowners. Can you tell us a little about some of the projects being implemented by IDOA, how they reduce nutrient loss from the ag sector?
Sure. So we have actually one long-running program here called the Partners for Conservation program. Basically what that is, it is a cost share program available through all 97 soil and water conservation districts. And those are for farm bill conservation projects that do not qualify. They still have to follow the farm bill engineering aspects of it. When I say that, either like waterways, field buffer strips. And like I said, those are for stuff that doesn't qualify for farm bill. So for example, if you just purchase a land and you've got some immediate erosion issues and you want to put in a waterway, well, you cannot, that doesn't qualify through farm bill because you need to own the land for a calendar year. So every year we get funds from the General Assembly that are facilitated through the Department of Ag for those soil and water conservation districts. The other one is for fall, is going now on our 5th year, the fall covers for spring savings. That program started 5 years ago at 50,000 acres, and now we've built it up to 140,000 acres. It's been highly successful. And with cover crops, that is the cheapest and fastest way to keep your soil anchored.
Can you share some of the key points from the most recent biennial report on the ag sector?
Sure. So there's some good points that are coming out of this. I think one thing that addresses is just the education aspect and outreach of what the nutrient loss is and its goals. So out of that, just out of the ag sector, and also when I talk about government and non-government, the program reached out to those producers, and the organizations reported more than 186 full-time members that specifically were engaged in the activities related to implementing the strategy. And then looking at what they've spent, and then collectively they expended nearly $51 million just in education and outreach for the nutrient loss reduction strategy and its goals associated with it. So I think that is just a good point that says Illinois is highly invested in the nutrient loss reduction strategy and its goals. I think another good thing coming out of it, NASS conducted a survey in 2022, gave some pretty good insights into the farmer awareness and the strategy implementation levels. So out of that NASS survey, it reported that 76% managed using the MR return, or the maximum return to nitrogen rates. So that's 76% of all those NASS surveys in 2022. And out of that, 85% of them use nitrogen inhibitor for fall and winter applied anhydrous ammonia. I think that is a really, really good mark, having that inhibitor and making sure when you do stuff during the fall that it's going to keep that anhydrous in place and not leaching out into the soil and eventually into the water.
A couple of other questions for the day. What are some of the barriers farmers and landowners are facing as they try to adopt more conservation practices?
I think one barrier is just trying to figure out because right now there's a multitude of programs, state and private. I think it's just trying to figure out what best program works for what your goal is. So we're trying to address that, keep putting things into one clearinghouse, so to speak. So I'll use cover crop programs, for example. Currently, there's about 14 different private and government programs that all just deal about specific funding for cover crops. So now there is a clearinghouse website that tells you what programs work with others and what don't work with others. So I think that's just one barrier the addressing is kind of a static barrier. Is like, hey, I've got this, but I don't know what works with what program, what works with, and what doesn't work with the other program. And I think the other part of that is just time and labor. As we all know, during the fall, and I'm going to speak against cover crops again, our priority is getting the crops out of the field. It's usually 100% workforce dedication, machinery dedication, and just having a lack of workforce holistically within ag. It's hard to find extra people to literally chase the combine and to get those crops planted in a timely fashion. Now, this year, I think we've had probably one of the best, I'll call, cover crop seasons in the fall, because we've had a relatively dry fall. Even going probably to date, we've only had a couple major rain events that kind of slowed us down. And during harvest, same way, a couple rain events have slowed us down for a little bit. But I'm foreseeing if this is the year for cover crops, this is definitely it. So that's allowed the farmers that didn't have that workforce in time to have the time later on the year, and not be canceled by what I'll call just the onset of the rain, where it pretty well washes everything out for the remainder of the year.
Finally, any advice you have for farmers as it's related to conservation practices and adopting them?
Identify what you want to do and prioritize, and start small. And I'm going to go right back to cover crops. I think the best advice that I'd ever heard out of the multitude of conferences and speakers is find something that you like, try it on 10, 25 acres. Don't start big, because you will encounter problems, and it's always easier to deal with a small problem than a large problem. Because if you deal with a large problem, then more than likely you won't try that conservation practice again the following year, because it was such a large headache.
Brian Renneker is the Bureau Chief for Land and Water Resources at the Illinois Department of Agriculture and involved with the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, also a farmer. We have one more farmer to talk to today that's also directly involved with the NLRS.
Jim Iserman. I live and farm near Streator, Illinois with my family. Work for the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership as well as a number of other organizations throughout the state of Illinois, kind of promoting conservation practices.
What is your connection to the nutrient loss reduction strategy?
So on our farm here by Streator, we raise corn, soybeans, and we have a cow calf operation, and we use strip till and no till for our tillage practices, and we try to get cover crops on most of our acres every year. So our connection is just to start off with that we're farmers. Just the basics of having a farm and the fact that the water that falls on our farm doesn't all end up here. It'll either run off or go through a tile system. So just realizing that we're connected to the systems of rivers and waterways throughout the state, and having that understanding is kind of the beginning of our connection to nutrient loss reduction, but also being involved with farm organizations throughout the years, such as Illinois Corn, Illinois Soybean Association. We've worked with Farm Bureau over the years, being involved with the Illinois Beef Association. All those organizations have done a pretty good job of highlighting early on what the issues with the nutrient loss reduction strategy are and helping us be aware of them as farmers.
What's your role with ISAP, the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership?
Yeah, so one of the things I get to do off farm is work with the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, and that organization was created to support the needs of the nutrient loss reduction strategy, primarily through education of farmers and farm advisors on practices that will address the needs of water quality and conservation in general. So I serve as a soil health specialist for ISAP, and in that role, I work primarily around education programs, including giving presentations and information on soil health and cover crop management. We have a trailered rainfall simulator that we can go around and do demonstrations of how rainfall interacts with different types of soils, and then facilitating or helping to facilitate the advanced soil health training, which is a program that's gone on for a number of years, just kind of educating more specifically farmers and advisors. But we're always bringing the issues of water quality and nutrient loss to the front of those programs and conversations. And ISAP has developed a large amount of resources on the website to help farmers, including information on conservation programs, carbon programs, in-field and edge-of-field practices that can reduce nutrient loss.
Why should farmers and landowners be concerned at all about nutrient loss and water quality?
Well, the obvious reason is just, being good stewards of the environment. I mean, that should always be an important point for all farmers to get behind. We just always need to be mindful of our impact that our practices have on others downstream or away from our fields. But more directly, when it comes to nutrient loss, especially on the nitrate side of things, this is a fertilizer that has value in our fields. And so there's a tremendous argument that these appropriate practices can also be economic practices for us in the long term, just by keeping what is a valuable product on our farms where it has value, rather than seeing it leave our fields where it then becomes a pollutant.
What actions do you think are necessary for farmers and landowners to take to reach the water quality goals Illinois has? They have a couple sets of goals, and it will take most of the producers in the state to do something to reach those.
Yeah, it's going to take a number of things to address it. And the first and simplest one is nitrogen management. This should be an easy one to implement simply because it provides an economic savings for farmers. It is the one that we've seen the most movement on because we're oftentimes talking about ultimately reducing the overall rate of nitrogen that is applied by applying it at the right time, or just not committing an over application. So we've seen, significant improvement in this using programs such as the maximum return to nitrogen, or even just some of the commercial monitoring programs that are out there that are kind of, looking at the yearly climate and soil organic matter to help reduce nitrogen rates. But in the end, this isn't just an issue of over application. In fact, quite a bit of the problem isn't the fact that we're putting too much nitrogen out there. It's simply that it's very mobile. It's always changing forms, and it can even just come out of the organic matter of our soil, even if we're not applying nitrogen. So Even with all that, we're going to need to see some other practices, such as cover crops and no-till, in particular on tiled ground, in order to capture these nitrates that can be leaving our fields. So we can look at edge of field practices. There's some really cool things such as wetlands and bioreactors that will play an important role. And farmers, should always look at those to kind of help the system. But in the end, we're going to have to see more implementation of cover crops, often coupled with reduced tillage practices. Maybe not on every acre. Maybe that's not the mentality that we have to have, but we're going to have to see these adopted on significant acres in order to address the issue of nitrates leaving our fields.
Cover crops is actually fairly easy for people to understand, meaning that the crop is green and it holds the nitrogen in place within the crop oftentimes. How does no-till help?
No-till, as far as nutrient loss, will have a couple of facets to that. Number one, I've been kind of concentrating on the nitrate side of things because that's something I understand a little bit better. The phosphorus side is, kind of the other component of that. So we do see big improvements with phosphorus loss because of no-till practices reduce overall soil erosion, and that is still one of the primary ways that phosphorus gets into our lakes and streams, is by being attached to the soil. Now there's research going on that shows that there are maybe some other ways that it's happening as well, and there's a lot of interesting research going on in terms of the phosphorus that is in our streams. But absolutely, no-till plays a big role in that. I also just see no-till or also reduced tillage systems, because it doesn't always need to be no-till. We're seeing guys who are very successful with strip tillage systems, but reducing that tillage in some way couples very well with cover crop management. Cover crops with tillage can be done. We certainly see that in organic systems oftentimes, but when we look at trying to address situations of keeping those nitrates and keeping the soil and the fertilizer in the systems, those reduced tillage systems such as strip till really couple very well with with cover crops. There's also some other things that can go out of the soil in terms of releasing nitrates and nitrogen from the organic matter when we apply tillage. There's some other things that go on there that just make those reduced tillage practices a good pairing with cover crops to address nutrient loss.
Finally, for those who are interested and want to adopt either new or develop conservation practices on their properties, whether they're landowners or farmers, how can they be supported by the nutrient loss reduction strategy?
So there's a lot of information in the nutrient loss reduction strategy itself about how to address this, walking through those different steps in terms of, utilizing cover crops or utilizing nitrogen management. But I think the important aspect that I see is once you decide what route you want to go, so if it's cover crops, for example, making sure that you're getting appropriate advice and appropriate resources. There's a ton of information out there in terms of cover crop management. There's lots of people starting to take on a lot of these practices. One of the downfalls that I probably see most of the time in a farmer adopting these practices is trying to take maybe some information from someone who wasn't in the same system and trying to apply it to their system. So an easy example is, if you're in a commodity corn and soybean system in central Illinois on flat back, black, high quality soils, you need to find guys who are in similar situations. You need to find researchers that are doing work in similar economic areas to apply to what you're doing. So maybe someone who's doing an organic system or has livestock involved, those systems and how they're managing them won't necessarily come back and it fits your program very well. Soil health has a lot of principles that are absolutely true. We see them talked about all the time. We see, keeping the cover on the soil, improving diversity, reducing tillage, all those things are very important, but how it actually gets applied to your system is what's going to matter. And what you're doing may be a little bit different than what somebody else is doing who might be out there on the internet or giving some sort of advice. So always make sure that you're paying attention to the context of that advice or that resource that you're looking to rely on. Make sure that that information is going to apply to your program as well. Because, at the end of the day, commodity corn and soybean systems, if you're wanting to adopt these practices, yield is not everything, but yield is pretty important. And we have to be cautious that we're not taking on practices that are negatively impacting our yield and therefore our economics while we're trying to address these problems. And there are ways to do that. We can do both. We can address the needs of the nutrient loss reduction strategy while maintaining good profitability.
Jim Iserman is a farmer and works for the Illinois Sustainable Agriculture Partnership. Today on this Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast, we've been talking about the 2023 Biennial Report. It is the fourth update to the strategy since its inception in 2015. Implementation of the NLRS is guided by research to optimize nutrient loss reduction while fostering deep collaboration and innovation across academia, the private sector, nonprofits, wastewater agencies, and local, state, and federal government agencies. Our program was produced in conjunction with University of Illinois Extension's Rachel Curry and Nicole Haverback. I'm Todd Gleason.